It's 2 in the morning, and mom hears her baby crying, and she fights through her exhaustion, crawls out of bed, stumbles down the hall, and picks the baby up, and tries to take care of her little child. Checks it's not the diaper, baby's not hungry, there's no fever, there's nothing to show any reason for concern, so she cuddles the baby close, whispers sweet nothing, and rocks her child back to sleep, knowing that she probably will have to do it all over again tomorrow night, if not in a couple of hours, because that's what being a mom requires. This room is filled with moms of all ages. And you're still a mom, even if you're a great-grandma. You're still a mom. And you know that. And so you get what that's like. You understand that no matter what, you will do anything to care for and protect your child, your baby. Yes, each mother-child relationship is unique, but there is a universality to how moms love their children. So universal that it is described as unnatural not to feel that love for your children. And that's why we're in Romans chapter 1. Romans chapter 1. In verses 28 through 32, Paul lists a number of things that are the result of people who don't serve God, who do not obey God. In verse 28, he says, "And just as they did not see fit to acknowledge God any longer, God gave them over to a depraved mind to do those things which are not proper, being filled with all unrighteousness." Listen to those three things. They have a depraved mind. They do things that are not proper. And they are unrighteous. And listed in this, in verse 31, is folks who are without understanding, untrustworthy, unloving, and unmerciful. And as you look at that word unloving here in the New American Standard, I use the 1995 New American Standard Version. It's that word unloving that is the description of moms who do not like their children the way that they should. The NIV calls it heartless. It uses the word heartless. And the King James Version does it better justice for us because it calls it without natural affection. Now, thankfully, it's rare enough to be seen for the evil that it is, because the norm, the usual, the regular pattern is for us to see moms who love their children with a natural affection. Now, to illustrate that, I reached out to some moms and got some input for today's lesson on what it's like to become a mom. And so one said that I have done a lot of things in my life and career that have brought me great satisfaction, but nothing that even compares to being a mother. I tell her child almost every night that being his mother will always be the greatest thing I'll ever do. It's definitely got its challenges, lack of sleep, being needed by someone essentially 24/7. But all of that is completely worth it to see the comfort he gets from me appearing in his room at night, or watching him beam with pride when he learns a new skill. I wouldn't say I used to be a selfish person, but I definitely had my own plans and desires. Becoming a wife and mother didn't change that, but anything that was or is solely about me has taken a back seat. My days, for the most part, are centered on, and I wouldn't have it any other way, centered on her child, and I wouldn't have it any other way. None of this is to say I don't fall short daily, but I can say with confidence that I am striving each day to be the best mother and wife that I can be, and to help my boys get to heaven. Boys included husband, and I know that. All men are basically just grown-up boys. Or maybe grown-up is not the right word, but you know what I mean. Another one said, "When I found out I was with our first child, I was extremely nervous. That quickly turned into joy, but the best way to explain what becoming a mother feels like is magical, wonderful, proud, gifted, and responsibility. God gifts us with children, and it is up to us to teach them what is right and of God. It is our responsibility to take them to church and show them the way. Their first smile, their first word is like magic and can light up a room," a common phrase from both moms. "Their sweet actions warm the heart. Being a mother is hard work, to say the least, but in the same sense, it is amazing and rewarding." And I appreciate the moms who shared that with me and giving me permission to use that. Because that is what being a mom is about. That describes the natural affection that a mother has for her child. But guys don't think, okay, well, this is going to be a sermon about moms and how to be a better mom. I'm not here to pound on moms and beat up on them and tell them how they can be better. Like I know that. Yeah, right. I'm a guy. No. This is a lesson that is for us as well, because despite the world's efforts to pervert the natural order of family life, there are only two parental roles in normal families: fathers and mothers. Even if the father or mother is a stepdad or stepmom, as long as they are good parents, they know that every child is best served by growing up in a home led by a mom and a dad working together. It is the best way for a child to grow up with a healthy and proper sense of self and the ability to be a responsible adult who will pass on the necessary life attitudes and skills to succeed to their children. It's not always possible. Sometimes there are single-parent families just because of things that happen in life. But it is the best. But again, that's not our lesson for today, though. That is to introduce us to our lesson, which is Paul's, our fourth of the mini-series from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, or 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, of purposeful preaching, and a lesson called Purposeful Preaching has parental concern. Because Paul takes and uses the description of moms caring for their children and fathers caring for their children to describe the work that he did with the church in Thessalonica. He uses that to illustrate, because there's no better illustration of the tender care and concern of a mom and the loving exhortation of a father to demonstrate how a congregation should be treated by those who lead it, whether it's the preacher like Dennis and myself, or elders or men who have leadership roles, whether informal or formal, and men and women as well. All of us have this illustration by Paul to learn from and figure out how best to apply in our lives. And so this morning, if you turn back to 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, we're going to work through a few things here in verses 7 through 10 on a nursing mother. And we just call this first point like nursing mothers in verses 7 through 10. We're going to go through 7 words there that are in the text there. And I know 7 sounds like a lot. We'll spend a little bit of time on 4 of them in particular. The last 3 we'll kind of skim over. And then we'll spend the last few minutes talking about dads and dad's role as encouraging fathers. But like a nursing mother, what Paul is doing is Paul is saying that I treated you like a nursing mom treats their children. Because when you think about it, Paul is the one who gave birth to this church by virtue of going to Thessalonica and preaching the gospel. So he feels that connection to them. They are his baby. And when it's your baby, you have a special concern for them and a special care for them. And that's exactly how he felt about it. And so he gives us this word that we get these illustrations that we can use. And the first one is a word called gentle or gentleness. That's in verse 7. But we proved to be gentle among you. Now, gentle is an interesting word because basically it means without speech. It's a word for a child who is not able to speak. Perhaps it's difficult then for us to picture Paul describing himself as someone who deals with people without speech, because what did Paul do? He preached. He was a preacher and teacher. He spent his time talking to people. But he also indicated that part of what he did was he took what women did, moms do, and with their babies, and applied that basic principle to caring for a local church. That is a description or a metaphorical explanation of the approach that Paul took to the Thessalonian church. Young Christians, when he left there, he had been there anywhere from 4 to 6 months. So they were just 6 months. Think of it as 6-month-old children that he had to leave, and that's why he was worried about them and so concerned about them. They were very special to him. What he's describing, and the idea here is that this is much better than what he could have done. Look at verse 6. This is why I had it, Brady read verse 6 for us. Nor did we seek glory from men, either from you or from others, even though as apostles of Christ, we might have asserted our authority. So what Paul was saying was, as an apostle, I could have come in and said, I'm in charge here. Y'all better do what I say. You better listen to me. I'm the guy. He didn't come with that approach. He came in like a mom who's holding that crying baby close and whispering. Just hush, hush, hush. Just making soundless wordless sounds to that child to try to get them to calm down or to be at peace. Mom cares for an infant with touch and silent words, or a silent sound, wordless sounds, instead of with barking orders. You don't pick up that little baby that's 6, 7 months old and say, "Why did you wet this diaper?" You don't talk to them like that. Because they wouldn't understand, you know that. And even when they get to be 2 years old, like my granddaughter, and you struggle with the fact that they're still a baby. And you talk to them in ways that they can understand, but they're not adults, and they don't talk like adults, and so we don't talk to them like adults. So in the same way, Paul didn't bark orders and command a subservient attitude out of the brethren in Thessalonica. Rather, he took a submissive attitude or a serving attitude himself and a role with them. And it's essential that preachers and teachers and men who would be leaders within a congregation understand that this is the approach that they need to make toward their fellow members in the congregation. Not just preachers and teachers and leaders, but all adults who are part of a congregation need to see themselves as being able to deal with and approach other people within a congregation like this. What we have to say as preachers is important, but members need to sense that what we're saying comes from a sincere heart. If we come across as bossy and dictatorial, our connections will break down. They will. The worst things that an eldership can do is just be dictators. I know a church in Florida that was there in the 80s. It was big. It approached 500 people, but they had a building that would seat 700, and it was getting where it was pretty much full. And then one day they had to fire the preacher, and they had to fire the preacher. There was no getting around that fact. But they did it in the absolute worst way possible. They fired him. And then one of the elders got up that morning and announced, "We fired the preacher. Move along. Nothing to see here." Made no effort to explain what they did or why they did it. They lost 100 people that day. And that attitude never got any better, and because this was in Orlando and it was down the road from where I was going at the time, and we watched that church split several times until it got down to nothing, and they had to sell that huge building, and people dispersed to various churches because of a bossy, dictatorial attitude instead of a mom's tender, gentle love. That's the way we need to treat it. It's a challenge to us to look at other people and think of how can I approach this person with gentleness and with love and with concern for him or for her, rather than got to tell it like it is and straighten them out. Because as conservatives, that tends to sometimes be our attitude and our approach, and we need to work on that and think about that a little bit. And that leads us to our next word, which is tenderness. Tenderness is shared warmth. It literally means to warm. Again, in verse 7, he says, "But we prove to be gentle among you, as a nursing mother tenderly cares for her own children." And the idea there is basically of pulling a child close and holding her close or him close and warming her up with your body. A mother's instinct is to hold her child close, to cuddle him or her in her arms, and it's a good instinct because it often is just exactly what a child needs, a fussy child needs. My wife calls me the baby whisperer, because when a grandchild is fussy and just won't settle down and not happy, they give him to me because I'm a walking heater. And I put that baby against my chest and he melts, or she melts, and falls asleep. I sit back in that rocking chair, and Grandpa goes to sleep too. That's not the point. We're not going to talk about that. It's the same way with leaders in church, preachers and teachers and elders and deacons, folks who would want to serve their other members. We have to look at ways to approach them with warmth that brings them into us and makes them feel comfortable with us. Instead of pushing them away, we need to bring them in and make them feel comfortable with us. And as Christians, we should expect and even insist that leaders demonstrate this kind of attitude with all those who need this kind of emotional support. Paul treated this infant church surrounded by hostile opposition with a loving, warm embrace, a bear hug, if you will, of bringing this church in and saying, I want you to know you are cared for. You are important to me. And another side issue, I won't take any time going down this road, is that this requires an acute awareness of what's going on in each other's life. One of the most difficult things, I think, in 21st century Christianity is we all live such separate, independent lives. And getting to know each other and getting to know what's going on in each other's lives is a struggle because we have jobs, we have obligations, we have family connections, we have other connections, and we tend to scatter and very seldom see each other outside of the confines of this building. That's why it's nice to see that Rob and Denise, I'm sorry that they're not here today, have invited folks out to their house next Saturday night. And if hopefully they'll be well, and hopefully it won't be bad weather, and folks will get to come. It'll be a good opportunity just to sit down and show affection to one another and tenderness to one another. Well, that takes us to a third word, affection. Affection is a tender concern for someone, an emotional attachment. Just ask mom if she has any feelings for her baby. And that's a silly question, right? Think of the story of Solomon. If you remember the story of Solomon early in his reign when he brought the story of the baby that there's a dispute over who's the mom, because two moms lived in the same house and slept in the same bed, and they both had infants that were the same age and looked alike, and one of them died in the night, and that mom's mother woke up and swapped the babies and took the living baby and claimed it was hers. And so there was this big argument, and nobody knew how to figure it out or how to resolve the issue. And so Solomon said, take a sword and cut the baby in half. And which woman stepped up and said, no, let her have it? Mom. Because mom has an affection for that baby, an emotional attachment that cannot be severed. So we have some great grandmas in here. Are your children still your babies? Your children are still your babies, aren't they? And your grandchildren are your babies, and your great-grandchildren are your babies. You have an affection for them. And so what Paul is telling us, brethren, men, is that we need to have that same kind of mindset toward each other. The affection that cares about each other. And it can't be a selective caring. It can't be cliquish. If you go into a church, or you find a church where there's cliques, where you have one group over here that talks only to themselves, another group over there talks only to themselves, and the third one over here, there's no cohesiveness, there's no affection, there's no unity there. And Paul is saying, no, that is not how it's supposed to be. We need to have affection for us, connecting to everyone as best as we possibly can. And that will require some giving of ourselves to other people and allowing them to know things about us. We don't live on islands. We can't hide in our man caves. Come out and get to know each other, and let folks get to know us. And the fourth one here is selfless. And this is in verses 9 and 10. He says in verse 9, he says, for you recall, brethren, our labor and hardship, how working night and day so as not to be a burden to any of you, we proclaim to you the gospel of God. You are witnesses, and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we behaved ourselves toward you, believers. Now, they gave themselves to the church. Actually, I skipped ahead to verse 9. Let me back up to verse 8. Having so fond an affection for you, we were well pleased to impart to you. Sorry about that. We were well pleased to impart to you not only the gospel of God, but also our own lives, because you had become very dear to us. And then he talks about how he had labored and worked so that they would not have to support them. They gave themselves for Timothy. He gave himself, and Silas and Timothy gave themselves for this church. This is what people who want to serve a church, whether it's as a preacher or a Bible class teacher or someone wanting to serve other brethren, it takes effort and hard work and a willingness to surrender the things that we want and the things that we desire. Moms, when that baby's crying at 2 o'clock in the morning, you lay there and say, I ain't getting up. Sometimes you might, if you know. All right, let's be honest. Sometimes you might, if you know that you let them cry it out. But I'm not talking about letting them cry it out situations. Brethren, if a brother calls you at 2 o'clock in the morning and says, I'm sick or something has happened, I need your help, do you say, hey, call Bob, leave me alone? Well, Bob says, call Steve. I gotta go to Bowling Green in the morning, leave me alone. No, you get up and you go help because you love each other. That's the approach that Paul brought to the church in Thessalonica, and that's the approach that he is calling for us to do. And that means, for preachers, and particularly I'm thinking of Paul as a preacher, that means digging into God's Word to feed the members of the congregation His Word, because that's what transforms lives. That's the living Word is the power of God to transformation of people's lives. But also pour ourselves into their heart, share their heart with us, and share our heart with them, letting them know who we are and learning who they are. Not just, the Word, but not just the Word alone. His heart, our hearts and souls need to be poured out to each other. That's why Jesus described himself as the door to the sheep. The Good Shepherd is one who gives his life for the sheep in John chapter 10. We give our lives for each other. And we know that a mom will do that. Paul's saying, Christians, you need to be able to do that for each other. That is the challenge. Well, the last three words we'll go through very quickly here are devoutly, uprightly, and blameless. Devoutly, this is in verse 9, the end of verse 9. We proclaim, verse 10, your witness and so is God, how devoutly and uprightly and blamelessly we behave toward you. These are adverbs describing behavior, their conduct, the way they lived in the presence of, and the way what they were in their heart and how it came out and how they lived and treated the brethren. Devoutly, it's just a form of the word holy. And it means being set apart to God. They set themselves apart to God. They were holy to God, and they knew it, and they believed it, and they lived it, so that it was seen as so that they were, everyone who would see them would know that they are holy. Upright just means righteous. It's the word that's translated righteous in many cases. It's the idea of being right before God. And so we live like we are going to be right before God. And the third one, there's blameless. It means you don't have anything hidden in your life that somebody can bring out and say, you got something on you. You know, how many times you hear people talking about politicians or about people that are in positions of power and they don't approach this or that because such and such has something on them. Christians, they should have nothing on us. And if we have sin, confess it, get it out there, deal with it, and move on so that nobody can hold it over your head and say, you know, you could be better about this. You can't preach to me about this because you do this. Can't be like that. Cannot be like that. Well, that's the nursing home. Those are characteristics of motherly treatment of little children. And what Paul is saying here is that you saw how I treated you like a mother treats her babies. That is a challenge. That is a high challenge to all of us. Well, then in verse 11, Paul switches to parents, like exhorting fathers. Now let's read verse 11. He says, just as you know, and notice how he points out how they're aware of these things. Verse 9, for you recall, brethren. Verse 10, you are witnesses. And verse 11, just as you know. So he's reminding them of things that they would be able to say, yeah, Paul, when you say this is the way it was, you're right. That's exactly what you did. And he says, so it is how God, or in verse 11, he says, just as you know how we were exhorting, encouraging, and imploring each one of you as a father would his own children. Now this word exhorting is the idea of being verbally assertive. Fathers are going to be more verbal and assertive in their relationship to the children. And let's just accept the reality, despite the world's effort to blend and blur the differences, men and women are different. Fathers and mothers are different. I almost used a screenshot of a photo. Maybe I should have. I wish I would have. Anyway, there's Or a cartoon out there of a dad tossing his kid up, and you see the kid going up, up here, tossing the kid up. And that's what dad sees. And then the next screen is what mom sees is the kid's about 20 feet up in the air, being tossed up so high, and dad's waiting to catch the child. It's the difference of perception between a man and a woman. The man is going to be more encouraging to swing higher, to jump further, to push themselves and go much further than mom sometimes wants them to do. And so that's what the word exhort means, is to come alongside and urge them to try harder, swing higher, and jump further. Moms kind of cringe and say, be a little more careful. Dads urge risk-taking. Get out there and you scraped your knee a little bit. Get up. You're okay. You can do this. And it's the same in the church. Sometimes brethren need to be hugged and embraced and given that warmth. Sometimes they need the encouragement, saying, you can do that. You can push beyond this. Don't quit now. You may have fallen and gotten hurt and you got weary, and we hold them up, and then we whisper in their ear, come on, you can do better. You can keep going. Let's push forward together. And you tell them things like, don't quit now. Or my daughter played softball, and when it came time to run or to do some of the drills, she got what I call spaghetti legs. Spaghetti legs are just like stand up straight and run. Don't fall out like you have no strength in your legs. And so I tell her, don't get spaghetti legs. In fact, that ended up in her wedding house because it was such a relationship issue between us. But our goal is to encourage people to do what is right. And that's what Paul's trying to do, is encourage people to do what is right because they want to, so that they will do it willingly. We can stand up here as preachers and just berate and beat and bang on you all day long. And if you're not what you want to do, you're not going to do it. You're not going to do it. In fact, in this next one, it says, encourage us to speak alongside. And that means to say, I believe in you. And as a preacher, I need to be saying this to you. And I know Dennis says this to you, and because that's why I thank you for coming. I appreciate the fact that you're coming. I made the mistake in early years of preaching that on Sunday night I'd get so aggravated at the people that weren't there that I would berate the people that were. It's just not smart. Because then they would feel bad. And then, when I was preaching in Clearwater a few years ago, I found out that there were certain people that if I spoke about attendance on Sunday morning, they wouldn't come for 2 weeks to show me that I can't tell them what to do. And so, I just don't preach on attendance much. And I certainly don't do it from a beat somebody over the head kind of viewpoint. Like, please come. You'll be blessed. And you'll bless brethren. And you'll bless each other if you will come. And that's all I can do. That's all we ask. So come back tonight. Come back on Wednesday, because brethren will be here studying together, and there'll be joy in coming to be here together. The last word here is implore. And that is to testify or give verbal instruction. And this is the idea simply that parents know more than their kids. Dads have been educated, moms have been educated, they know things that their children don't know. Children, they experience something for the first time, and they think their world is going to just collapse on them, because they've never experienced this before. You've been there. And you're trying, and you have to try to talk them through the fact that, you know what? This has happened to other people. Dads may say, your mom went through this with her first boyfriend, and she met me, and everything's great. I'm not going to say that, but anyway. The idea is you use words to instruct and encourage. Isn't that the way dads do? And sometimes they get a little overboard. Not only was I known as the baby whisperer, or am I known as the baby whisperer, I'm also known as lecture man. Because if it took 5 words to tell a kid something, 50 would be a lot better. And so I'll stop right there. Parents know from experience things that their children don't, and so share that with them. And older Christians know things from experience that younger Christians don't. It's our job to share that with them. gently, kindly, tenderly, but share it with them. That's purposeful preaching. It combines the tender gentleness of a mom with a more assertive and forceful drive of a dad. Mom and love, and so it's the idea of holding people close when they hurt, and then dust off the dirt and tell them to get back in there because you can win. You can succeed. You know, life is challenging to all of us. It challenges every one of us, whether it's health or work or family or something else entirely. The world will seek to beat you down and make you quit. That is its goal. That's why Satan is the Lord of this earth who seeks to make everybody quit serving God. And we come here to let preaching and teaching and the encouragement that we find from each other and the hugging and the tenderness lift us up. Send us back into the world, confident that in Christ we can, and in fact we will, win over this world. That's what purposeful preaching does. That's what moms and dads working together and Christians working together do for one another. Where are you today in the relationship with this? If you're not a Christian, then you're not sharing in this father and mother-child relationship. Not from the standpoint of your relationship to God. And what you need to understand is that God is calling you, come to me. The Lord is calling you, come to me, be my child, and I will love you deeper than you've ever been loved before. I may get on to you a little bit every once in a while. I may have some strong words to share with you from time to time, but I'll love you, and I'll say the things because I love you, that you need because I love you. And that means that if you're not in Christ, you're a sinner lost. But Jesus died so that you don't have to be lost. So that you can go to heaven, so that you can be saved, so that you can be his child and be with him for all eternity. That's what the Lord has done for you. He wants to embrace you if you will come to him. And if you're a Christian who has slipped up and needs some holding and some comforting and encouraging and some exhortation, somebody to hold you close and whisper in your ear, I love you brother, I love you sister, we can do that. And we'll help you do that. Got a song box. We'll sing a song of invitation. And while we're singing this song, we're wanting you to know that if you need to obey the gospel today, that we're here. We're waiting. We're begging you. Please come. Will you come while we stand and sing?